I was thinking when I made this sermon. So our story begins with the greatest generation. That's the name of it, that's not just my opinion. Born in the early 20th century, we'll just talk through a bit about what the lives of the greatest generation typically look like. So, they'd be born in the wake of the First World War. Up to that point in history, the greatest, bloodiest tragedy in the world. 22 million deaths, 23 million wounded, physical wounds as well as emotional, mental wounds, lots of PTSD. And then just after the First World War, it's the Spanish flu, 50 million deaths. Imagine being born at this time. You might have lost your father might come home missing legs, blind, and even your whole family could be affected. The bombing raids, the carve-up of cities and countries in Europe. It was a really grim time to be born and to be raised during the First World War and then in the wake of it. But then, a glimmer of hope comes with the roaring 20s. Women get the vote, women can go out, more free from their husbands, economic prosperity increases, the economy grows, changing culture, new technologies, fridges come about, radios. Life, in contrast to previously, seemed to be going really well, people were spending money. But then suddenly, the Great Depression hits in complete contrast to the roaring 20s. And the Great Depression is quite hard to wrap your head around because we've never had a tragic economic hardship as big as this. A huge economic collapse. All the banks collapse. Unemployment reaches 25%. Wages fall by 42%. And the political turmoil in this scenario is mind-bogglingly difficult to grow up in this time. Families were living on a shoestring budget. Your parents might not be able to work, might not be able to afford food. Really hard economic hardships. And previously to this, there were citizens in the Soviet Union who left Russia because obviously the communist uprising, they don't want to live in a communist country. They moved to America. The Great Depression hits, and life is so bad during the Great Depression, they moved back to the Soviet Union. Oops. Can you imagine that you left the Soviet Union, went to America for greater life, and it was actually worse. You went back to Russia. Kind of crazy to think about. And then those American Russians actually were also mistreated under the Soviet regime, so they also lived very hard lives. And this doesn't slow down or stop, this just carries on until the next big event in your life would be the Second World War. A tragedy and a conflict even greater than the First World War, 75 million deaths. If you were born in the Soviet Union in 1923, there was a 68% chance that you were going to die before the end of the war. Huge tragedies. If you were a German U-boat seaman, you had a 75% chance of dying. And these were not fanatical Nazis, these were just young boys who wanted to serve their country. And only 1 in 4 of them would make it out alive at the end of the war. For 6 years, every corner of the world was in conflict and total war as well, rationing, bombing raids, obviously the Holocaust. You were not safe, essentially. But that obviously comes to an end, and then the next generation is born, the baby boomer generation, and life for them was completely different in contrast to their previous generation. They saw a huge cultural shift, civil rights movement, universities and colleges opened up. Many people were getting educated, getting good jobs, economic prosperity and stability. Houses were cheap, wages were high. TV, technology advances through that. And that continues then for many years. Obviously, they lost the conflict of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, but they were never as big or as involving everyone in the world as much as the previous world wars. And then the next generation after that there's a slowdown in the 1980s and 1990s comes about. Things get a little bit more challenging. You've got the breakup of Yugoslavia, 9/11, the war on terror. Things start to get a bit more harder to deal with. And then growing up now, obviously we got hit by COVID-19, economic uncertainty, inflation is incredibly high, wages haven't grown with the economy, housing crisis, deep political divide. I'm sure all of you are aware that the political landscape at the moment is very divided. People arguing over everything and anything. Obviously social media is another aspect which on the scope of it seems good, but obviously there's many dangers behind that. And again, conflict, war back on the European continent, the Middle East, again, starting up again. It doesn't seem to be going well anymore. So this often follows a cycle of hard times. Quick, strong people, good times, come out of that, and then weak people. So I'll just talk through it again. Hard times, you grew up in the Great Depression, you essentially make do or make do without. You obviously can't afford the luxuries. You learn how to fix your clothes, grow your own crops. But then those hard times create strong people, resilient people who can prepare for the future. So obviously the Roaring '20s, life was good, and then the Great Depression, life was bad. The World War came, that was bad again. They were able to prepare for the future and become strong characters. And those strong people then created good times, the economic boom. During the post-war times, technology was advancing. And then that created obviously good times. And out of those good times, you had lots of consumerism, capitalism. You could buy anything you wanted, you could spend money, you could buy cheap housing, and that kind of led to the idea that life is good now. Life will always be good because they hadn't faced the hardships that the previous generation did. And so then now we're leading to more harder times are coming back up again, and obviously we don't know what the future holds with global warming, rising sea levels, more conflict, and this cycle just seems to keep on going. I'm sure previous generations also thought the same. But how does this relate to a sermon? Might be asking. Well, I see a parallel between the societal generations and also the generations within our own movement. So let's talk through the life of first gen. You met the church. You were like, okay, this is good. I'm gonna join the church and do whatever I can. Well, you were at fundraising and witnessing, doing missionary work for 7 years, maybe even indefinitely, maybe even more than you signed up for. But you were sacrificing an immense amount. You maybe had to cut off relationships with your family. You were ostracized by the media. People maybe didn't give you the time of day when you were really trying to just do God's work. And their life was essentially all about the sacrifice. And then they did all that mission work. They went to the blessing. And then the Westerners then got matched to Eastern Asians. Lots of, obviously not mixed cultures came together, and those lessons were also very difficult. So they led quite hard lives. But through their hardship and through their build-up of their resilience and their faith, they were able to bring us into the world, the second generation. Our lives were in complete contrast with the first gen. We had huge communities and huge workshops. Not specifically this workshop, but there were hundreds of us in Cardiff. We were stuffed in there, and we had a much nicer upbringing and early life compared to the first generation. We didn't have to go fundraising and witnessing. Obviously, some of us chose to do that on our programs, but yeah, you didn't have to sacrifice so much. The kind of the stigma against being a Mooney kind of faded. You could tell your friends, and like, oh, cool, but there were never any ostracism and media kind of paint us in a bad light. But because we grew up in such a good time, we weren't able to really grow the resilience that we needed to create good times. We had it so easy. Again, like the boomer generation, we never saw hard times. We never been able to grow, and I don't think as a whole we ever thought okay, we need to create a good future for our children. We had workshops. Workshops are always going to be there. We didn't feel the need to continue that tradition of having strong families, because we grew up in a strong family, so we'll have a strong family. We didn't have to grow and put in the effort to prepare the next generation to create good times for them as well. So when I see ICO and Eris's future, will they have the big workshops that I grew up in, that my siblings grew up in? I don't know, maybe there's not going to be enough people, or they're not going to be the right people organising those workshops. But obviously there is hope in that, because we can always break this cycle. We can grow from the challenges that face us, and we can become stronger. We can grow our faith rather than just accepting. A lot of second generation just accepted, I believe in God. They never really delved deeper into it, because they never needed to deepen that relationship with God and grow. But I think we should have prepared more for the future and created a world for our children to grow up in and have the same communities that we also grew up with. And I'm definitely, what's it called? Let me found this cycle of, the church will always be there, I don't need to give in to the church, I can just accept it, and my children will have the same, but maybe they won't have the same because of our failings. So it's a bit bleak sermon, but I really thought I can inspire maybe the younger people to think more about the future they're going to leave their children. So that's the end of that, and do you agree?